I thought that would count. And I was like, wow,
Are we
two.
on, Romy? Again. Let's call this meeting to order. Mr. Walsh, would you lead us in a flag salute?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Sunshine Law Statement, all requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act have been met for this meeting of the Board of Education of the Borough of Oradell. Notice of this meeting was filed with the Record and Town News, and all persons requesting such notice. Mr. Darian, would you read the mission statement?
The Oradell Public School District is dedicated to the ongoing pursuit of educational excellence through comprehensive, innovative curriculum and instruction. The district is committed to providing opportunities for social, emotional, and academic discovery to foster curiosity, courage, and character. Our goal is to prepare our students to become lifelong learners who are self-directed, resilient, productive, responsible citizens.
Thank you. Roll call.
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Here.
Mrs. Downing? Mr. Griffin?
Here.
Mrs. Norian?
Here.
Mrs. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Walsh?
Here.
Mr. Darian?
Here.
Mrs. Nichols?
Here, open to the public for agenda items only. Okay, yes. The new committee structure is in your folder. There is, yes, one mistake. I guess I made a mistake. We're just going to swap. Pooja's going to be the chair of curriculum this year, and Catherine's going to be the chair of policy. And also task force is still Jeremy Griffin in case we need it. You're still on that. So I guess can we just print up new ones next week? And the only other thing in our packets, if everyone saw that we got all these donations from the PTA. But other than that, we'll go to the superintendent's report.
Before I get to the more exciting part of my report, I do have legal obligation to share twice a year our school safety data submission date report, which does get sent to the state. The submission of it doesn't need board approval, but I do have a requirement to share the data that I will be submitting. So this is the report that talks about how many incidents of violence and vandalism we've had, how many alleged HIB, how many confirmed HIB, the HIB trainings we've done across the district, and the HIB programs we've done across the district. And this year, there is one new piece we have to include, and that is the number of occurrences of a time a child was either restrained or secluded. And that has a lot to do with the state being concerned. There's been some articles in the paper about how restraint and seclusion have been used in some districts. So our data for September 1st to December 31st, 2022 is that we have had 0 instances of violence and vandalism. We've had 0 alleged HIBs, and we've had 0 confirmed HIBs. We have had 1 instance of restraint, but that restraint did not include seclusion. Additionally, the programs that we've done are the programs that we do every year. The Rima's, Mrs. Mason's programs that she does from the school counselor office, our Open Circle program, Week of Respect activities, turkeygrams, my special gifts, and the HIB trainings are the ones we do every year, with the exception of there's one additional one this year. Within a 5-year time frame, every school district member who interacts with students must have 2 hours of suicide prevention training. So we haven't done that in 5 years, so every staff member also has 2 hours of suicide prevention training, which actually does fall under this as well. Now, the more exciting part is talking a little bit about Professional Development Day on Monday. When I talk to students and I ask them what they did on Monday, I always try to tell them what their teachers did, because their teachers were here, and I don't think everyone realizes that. And the concept of what happens on Professional Development Day, it's one of the things that makes me incredibly proud of our district. The easiest way to do Professional Development Day is to hire a speaker, throw your entire staff in the auditorium, and have them sit there for 6 hours. And guess what? Not a lot of people grow from that. So when I tell people in other districts what we do, and we have a teacher who has worked in another district, and she commented on this. I'm incredibly proud of it because we try to do with our teachers what we do with our students, which is to differentiate the professional development based on their needs and also their interests and their wants at that time. So our professional development day, most importantly, is always anchored in our district goals. If we suddenly did professional development in lacrosse, that wouldn't make a lot of sense for us. So 2 of our big district goals over the past 2 years have been inquiry, and you can see there how that moved from the STEM and STEAM principles to looking for an inquiry approach across the curriculum, and data-informed instruction. So a lot of our professional development day focused on that. The other part, as you'll remember, there's a lot of new curriculum this year, from social studies to theater standards. So we threw that a little bit into our professional development day as well. Now, I look at most things as it's both a blessing and a curse. One of the things that's lovely about Oradell Public School being so large is we're the center of a community. One of the hard parts about being a community that's so large is being unified all the time. So having definitions and knowing that as a school community, we're all working on the same thing is important. So the first session of Professional Development Day was Mrs. Brancato and I leading a session on engagement. Because if we're going to work on engagement, we need to make sure that we have a common definition. So we created this graphic using the Mentimeter software, which means we asked every staff member to take out their phone or their laptop and write 3 words they think of when they think of engagement. The words that are larger on that graphic right there are the words that showed up the most often: participation, conversation, questions, questioning, discussion, curiosity. But even that, you need to unpack a little bit. So that's what we did next. We started to talk as an entire school community about what are we going to see specifically in an engaged classroom. And these were some of the things we agreed upon. And how can we, as individual practitioners, foster engagement? And these were some of the pieces we agreed upon. And then from there, I had never spoken to the staff about the walkthrough data we were collecting because teachers love to be perfect all the time. And they get nervous when we walk through if we tell them we're collecting data because they think it's personal. And one of the things I shared with them is that my role as superintendent is, frankly, not to be personal, it's to see trends. So I wanted to be very clear with them that the data that we were going to share was about 90 visits to classrooms, and they represent visits in each of those grade levels. You're going to notice that it says kindergarten, pre-K, and also kindergarten. You can put those 2 together. We realized after we started collecting data that you can't keep pre-K out. We have 1 pre-K teacher. So that would be a little identifiable. So that's why there's 2 categories there. And we wanted them to know that everything we saw was about all of us together. It wasn't about 2nd grade, it wasn't about 3rd grade, it wasn't about kindergarten. It wasn't about PE, because we looked at students in PE and music class and art class. It was about the Oradell Public School community. And then we started to share a little bit about what we collected. So when we've been doing these walkthroughs, one of the questions we've been asking students are, what are you doing? Another question we've been asking them is, do you know why you're doing it? Does it connect to something you've learned before? Is there a reason in the real world? And what we learned, and what you can see by the green portion of the first pie chart, is that the majority of our students know what they need to do at that moment. They can tell you that they need to use this algorithm to solve a fraction equation. They can talk to you about what the teacher taught in the lesson and what they have to do. Ask them, like, why? How does this connect to what you learned yesterday? How does it connect to the real world? And they are incredibly compliant learners. I say that about our students all the time, and they go, because someday I may need it. So I think we've taught them that, and we might need to teach them something else to say instead. And then we started to also, as we've been walking through, we've been really looking at, just as teachers said that engagement has to do with conversation, participation, communication, we believe that as an admin team. So we started to collect data of who was talking in the classroom. In an engaged classroom, the teacher is not the only one talking. The student is not just passive receiver of knowledge. So the blue is the teacher is the only one speaking. The red, which is our biggest portion there, is the teacher is speaking, one person is answering. While that's a step up, it's still, we want to see more student voice in the classroom. So then we started to ask the staff as a whole in our auditorium with 100 staff members, so what can you do? What do you do in your classroom to build student voice? Because you've said it and we've said it that conversation and voice in the classroom is one of the keys to active engagement. And they came up with some of these items. Well, all of those. Okay. And then we shared the rest of the information that we've been collecting walkthrough data on. We didn't give them the exact percentages for these because we didn't see anything really exciting in it. They were all pretty even. But we wanted them to know that as an administrative team, we had done some research, and these were the items that had come up in engagement articles as indicators of classrooms where engagement was high. And then we said, okay, so what's next? That's great that we've shared this information. That's great that you've come up with some things, but what are you specifically going to do? So every staff member that was at Professional Development Day has completed a form of a strategy they'll be using to increase student voice in the classroom and a way to identify if students are engaged. One of the items we shared information with them on is how can you look at students working in a group to know if they're engaged? It's not just, is the child talking? What are they talking about? Body language, activity. So we gave them some checklists they can use, and some of them may choose to use that, but what are you going to do to evaluate yourself? Because the truth is, as administrators, we can't be in there every single day. And I trust that our staff are caring and reflective practitioners who want to get better every day. So what are they going to do to push themselves to get better every day? And one of the pieces that I shared with them is that there are two types of school leaders. There's the school leader that comes in and says, we will all do this to get better, so every time I go into your classroom, you will be doing this. And I've worked for some of them. Whereas there's the school leader that comes in and says, I trust you as a professional to honestly reflect right now and say, I'm good at this. And this is what I'm going to get better at, and this is how I'm going to do it. The reason we ask them to fill it out is so we know, because that's the accountability piece. How do we help you grow in this area? The entire administrative team has access to their feedback. Now, you'll remember that we're also using Panorama, which is a social emotional platform. It asks students to answer questions like, when something gets hard, do you give up? Do you feel safe at school? Do you feel like your teacher's helping you? Do you persevere when on a task for more than a week? Lots of different questions like that. And we started using this last year and noticed that grit and self-efficacy were our two areas to strengthen. So we had administered this to our students in that November time. So we also gave teachers access to their student data, which is not something we did last year. Last year, we just looked at whole school data, and we set goals that way. This year, we said, now repeat the process we used as a whole school with grade levels to your individual classroom. Now, what's different this time is we did not do self-efficacy about math last time, but knowing that during INRS meetings or talking with parents, kids feeling frustrated and that I'm not good at math attitude was coming out, so we asked some questions about that. And this school climate one, we deliberately added, these are our questions. And they're specifically aligned to what we were defining engagement as, and also what we were seeing in the classroom. And what I love about it is the area they were the lowest in was when I learned something new, I can explain how what I learned connects to other things I've learned. So everything we saw that they weren't doing, they know they're not doing either. And that's how you kind of united as a community to say, okay, let's all get better at this together. But you love when your data's all aligned. So what's next? We then asked them to do the exact same thing with the Panorama data that we asked them to do with the engagement data. Pick an area that you want your students to get better at from one of those: self-efficacy, self-efficacy about math, grits, growth mindset, emotional regulation, and then share a strategy that you're going to specifically use. Often with this one, because students at a grade level often do score similarly. With grade levels may have come up with a strategy together. And we actually like that sometimes because the entire grade level can reinforce it. And they can also tell the special area teachers, which like lets the special area teacher know, oh, this grade's working on this right now. Okay, so that was how we spent the first hour and a half of our day. And then we went to grade level planning. We do typically on every professional day try to allot an hour for grade levels to meet together, because any teacher knows that no matter how much planning time you have, you could always have more. And there's so much new curriculum. Second grade was telling me they worked on the standard, this new unit that has the theater standards in it. They've never taught it before, so they were working on that. First grade shared with me that they worked on social studies because it's a brand new unit for them. So the same type of thing. Our instructional aides, they weren't thrilled about this, truthfully, but we asked them to participate in regional professional development. And the reason is it's a great resource. But if people don't use it, they're not going to do it anymore. So right now, Region 5 joined up with, I think, Region 2 and Region 3, and they ran virtual workshops. So our aides came here, but they did some virtual training on anxiety. They got to choose from they had 2 different sessions, and they got to choose during each one. Anxiety, depression, school refusal, supporting struggling readers, which was supposedly the best one of them, and general strategies for understanding and supporting students with disabilities. Then we had lunch, and we got to the bottom part of the day, and the bottom part of the day is one of the pieces that makes me most proud to be the superintendent of the Oradell Public School District, because our teachers taught each other, and our teachers got to choose where they wanted to grow. So there were 3 one-hour sessions, and during those one-hour sessions, teachers chose from the list in that time frame. Now, it's a slight misnomer to say they chose, because if you were a kindergarten through 3rd grade teacher or a special education teacher or an ESL teacher, you had to take dyslexia because it's a state mandate. So we offered it twice, so you could choose which time you took it. If you were a K-4 teacher that taught social studies, you had to, during the 120 slot, take the social studies PD, because it was about the new resource we're using, and it was the vendor from that resource that was providing it. But every other workshop there was taught by either an administrator or a teacher. So Dr. Roth taught progressive muscle relaxation, which is a strategy. We all talk about yoga in the classroom all the time. Progressive muscle relaxation is actually an easier way to help kids calm down, where they isolate their muscles and they tighten them up and then they relax them. Mrs. Avgerinos taught math mindset, to talk to teachers about what do you do when you have to create a positive attitude towards math with students. Our English language learners taught about ELL learners. Our learning consultant taught about dyslexia. One of our 4th grade teachers talked about color-coded grammar. If you know how to color code the parts of speech in a sentence, you actually will always be able to check if your sentence is a complete sentence, because you highlight a noun in yellow, and you highlight a verb in orange, and every sentence has to have those 2. So it's one way to check sometimes.
Like
And
diagramming.
it is, except it's more fun because it's colored. And it involves highlighters.
Yeah, those lines were not any fun.
No, they were hard. Okay. And all of those choice sessions, again, go back to district goals. So those topics on the top, the differentiation, the active engagement, social emotional learning, and mental health, they're all things that are woven into our district goals. And as I was deciding where to put some of them, I realized that some of them fit in more than one place. So making the most of win and choice boards, every class has a win period, a what I need period. A choice board helps a kid to decide, what am I going to do during that period? Here are my options. Think of it like a tic-tac-toe board. Here are my options. What do I need to do today? And this is really small for you to read, and we've just started getting feedback, but I checked, every time we do a professional development day, we do ask staff for feedback on something they've learned and something they wish that, we'd consider for the future. So this was just some of the feedback I notice today, and we only have, I think they have a couple days yet to submit it. So I only had 20 responses to pick from, but as I was reading it, I was wishing I'd gone to I went to every class, but sometimes it was to take a picture, and I was like, oh, inner coach and inner critic. I kind of wish I was at that class. So do you have any questions, comments, or wondering about our professional development day?
Can we get a list of the classes and who taught them? Just so we could see who taught them?
Sure, you've approved them already.
I know, but we can't remember that way. We like to
Okay.
see it.
You have the
This way.
classes on there, but I will
Yeah.
reprint it out, no, attached on the back page.
Yeah,
But
I
I
know.
guess I will reprint it out with the people who taught them.
Any negative feedback or all positive?
Well, the negative feedback is always like, could the day be remote? It is the problem that comes up with Martin Luther King. We are one of the few districts that does professional, not the only, but not everyone does professional development day. So if your children were in school, but no. And what I say to staff when they ask me that is, again, what I said before, we're a really big school. Guess when you get to actually see people from other places at professional development day? We always do some kind of icebreaker the morning of professional development day, because you're going to see people that you've never seen since the first day of school. So I think being here and being together is incredibly important. But I would be happy to also include that data when it's done.
Megan, I see here about open circle, so we're still doing open circle.
It's funny because I was talking to the administrative team about this today. When we chose Open Circle, the reason it was the program that was chosen is because it had two things. It had structures and it had set lessons. So I think what we're going to work on is, I still believe in the structures, and I still believe that as a district, we need cohesive language. So we need something. And I think that even though Open Circle is not giving professional development, we can still do that. We can look through the Open Circle lessons and say, every student must know that a double D behavior is dangerous and destructive behavior, and if they see that, they should tell someone. Okay? And that would be a consistent language. I believe in the circle of coming together to have the lesson. So I think the answer is, we take Open Circle and the basics of it, and some of this other stuff, like one of the sessions was on some SEL stuff, you can do those topics in your Open Circle. So I would still say, yes, I'm not going to say we're going to teach every single lesson in Open Circle, but we're going to continue to use the structures, and we're going to continue to use the language, because I will tell you, and not just because Mr. Butcher's sitting there, if you're a special area teacher and every classroom does something different to get students quiet, it doesn't work. It's hard. So if we could agree that at Oradell Public School, we are all going to use this word, this word, this word, this word, that comes out of the Open Circle curriculum, but we're also going to let you spread your wings a little bit with SEL, I would be quite content.
So you have to go back now and regroup and say, we're going to go back to that.
Well, we've been using it. Every teacher has an SEL block in their schedule, and the expectation is they are teaching some of the Open Circle lessons. There are teachers who now are finding some things they like better. So this is the time for us to say, there are some other things out there that are awesome, but we're still going to maintain some parts of Open Circle. So yes, we have to regroup.
Thank you.
Did every teacher present answer the engagement walkthroughs?
The question about what are they going to
All of
do?
them. All of them.
Well, they don't answer those, I answer those. So those,
I mean, they had their classrooms now full.
but I do that. Administrators do that. We collect that data. Their job now is to take what they've learned and what the data was collected and decide. But they don't fill out that. We do.
So they don't answer those questions?
No.
They don't say that their classroom has number one, number three, number...
No. They decide what they're going to get better at, because if they tried to work on all 6 of those at once, that wouldn't work.
But they've seen these questions, these
they've seen
That,
all of these.
that was the first time they saw it. We did not want to
Okay.
give them those before we collected data because there was a slight bad taste in their mouth from the last time we did walkthroughs 7 years ago.
So you don't think it would help if they looked at it and checked off the ones that mirror their classroom at present?
I'm not sure they
Okay.
could because it's also all day long. So if it mirrors it, if you did it in math, that doesn't mean you did it all day long. And I don't
Well,
want you to
let's
think
say-
you did it.
Let's say number one, I mean, students are participating, talking with peers, asking questions. If that's what their classroom is like, then they can check that off. If it's not, then, you know, there's something missing. They got to get the ones that are not talking.
You're right, and that's actually why we gave them some
Okay.
forms to use, and I think that's what you're saying, that this could be one of those forms.
That's why I'm not a teacher.
There's still time, John.
Yeah, I got a couple of years.
I have a different question. Did we have any teachers absent from PD? And how do they kind of make up for the time lost at all? Do they have any opportunity to, get some of
They
this
would
learning?
have to, like social studies, there was actually a PowerPoint that they could use to catch. I mean, there's the compliance piece of making up, and there's the professional development piece of making up. So the compliance piece is that part of why we have professional development days is the state mandates 100 hours of professional development every 5 years. So they won't have those, and they're going to have to figure out how to get those hours. The other piece is their grade levels are usually pretty good about giving it, and Amy did make sure they had the social studies presentation. I'm trying to think, now that I'm thinking about it, I have not put this somewhere publicly, but I will put it in the presentation I use, not this one specifically, the one I use for PD, in the faculty flash that we can, so that they have that. That's actually a really good idea.
How many staff missed?
Including custodians, administrators, everything's administrative staff, there were 13 staff members out. We do have there's some illness. Like if I ask for notes, I'd have them in 3 seconds.
There's a couple of things that stood out to me reviewing your slides. And, I could relate to these, even though that it's been a long time since I've been in school, especially like an elementary school setting. You can imagine it's probably half a century ago. But the pie chart, I don't know what slide number it's on. The one where one teacher was only speaking and the teacher is asking questions and only one student is responding. That combined is 45.5%. So, I could relate to that. So it probably hasn't changed much in 50 years or so. But I'd be curious to see, what we decide to do to help improve that.
Well, and that's really, if you look at the other slides, what the focus was on how do you increase voice in the classroom, because that is our concern as well. The fact is, if you're talking, guess what?
Yeah,
As long
of
as you're
course.
talking on task, you're engaged.
Or, right. But I'd like to see, if there's anything that comes out of it, like change and what's been positive, like a follow-up to this
Sure, that's
presentation.
actually, well, and the reason I did it this way was because that actually would be how you evaluate the district goal. Because
Okay.
this is specifically the district goal, and the message I heard from you was that you wanted me to try to quantify it. So this was the only way I could figure out to quantify engagement. So,
And then the other thing I noticed was that this is the slide with panorama. When I learn something new, I can explain how I learn connects to other things I've learned. And, I could feel like, I'm in the dark. I come to class, I learn this, but I don't understand how it connects to last week, or when is it going to end, and when do we complete the year, and are we going to reach our milestone early or late, or, there's just no sense of progress. And I think that if you were to lay a timeline with all the milestones, it may be, of course, it may be intimidating, at the beginning of the year, but there may be connections to say, okay, we're 3/4 of the way through. and I know how what I'm learning today is going to help me in the future. So, or if I miss something, what I need to do to get back on track because I'm going to need it later on. And so I'd be interested to see, what we implement that addresses those areas to help.
Yeah, because one of the things that I was thinking about is I'm not a visual teacher. I'm not really a super visual learner either. And so I don't always think that way. And one of the teachers said one of the ways to get engagement is to include more visual, more drawing. And I kept thinking about that, of having students create kind of webs of how things connect, because that's the visual representation of connection.
Well, I'm a visual learner. I can't figure out how you learn any other way. All right. That's all I have.
That concludes my report.
No report tonight.
Okay. With the minutes. We have the review of January 4th. Any questions or comments, please email Mr. Marmara. And we have approval of December 14th. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the meeting minutes of December 14th.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Walker. Any questions? Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downey? Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker? Mr. Walsh?
Yes,
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes, Mr. Darian, would you take administrative items?
Yes, I'd like to introduce items A1.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? I have a question. Could you just remind us what this is again?
Twice a year, we need to submit to the county a document that has two checkoffs. One is that if we're that we have a job description for our instructional aides, and it hasn't changed since we last sent it to the county, which is true for us and has been for at least 2 years now. And the second one is that individuals who are in an aide position are qualified to be there. They've gone through some kind of screening process. If any of our aides were paid for with Title I funds, there would be extra requirements, but we get very little Title I funds, so we don't use any for aides.
Any other questions? Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downey? Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes,
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes, buildings and grounds, Mr. Darian?
Yes, before I introduce any items, I just want to give the board an update on some recent developments with the auditorium. We now have some progress with the painting. The behind the curtain stage area is completely painted. The ceilings, the walls, the stage is, the floor is finished. The curtains are scheduled to be installed. We're getting close to the very end. We have cleaning, we have some lamp light replacements. We have some doors, because the current doors are not up to buyer standards. But, those are small items that can be done on a small project basis, but we're getting close to the end. So we even had discussions of whether or not we should have this meeting in the auditorium. We're getting that close. So I just wanted to let everyone know. And as a result of the activities that our contractor has done, they're back on the agenda. If you look under Finance D6 for GL Group payment, the items in bold are what we're paying them. And the last item, balance to finish, after we pay them today, if we approve to pay them today, then the balance is still at the very bottom. So with that said, and with that update, I'd like to introduce items B1.
I'll second it.
Any questions? Mrs. Walker?
G10.
We're going
We're
to just
just-
do buildings and grounds now.
Yeah, sorry.
Greg confused us by.
Jumping
He's got
ahead.
another one. Yeah, we're just doing buildings and grounds right now. Sorry. Any other questions?
A yes vote would be nice.
Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downey?
Yeah.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian,
Yes.
Mrs. Walker,
Yeah.
Mr. Walsh,
Yes.
Mr. Darian,
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols.
Yes, I'm going to switch this over to the new chair, curriculum, Mrs. Needham.
I'd like to present item C1.
I'll second it.
Any questions? Call the question?
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Needham?
Yes.
Mrs. Downey?
Yeah.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
I remember when I went to the Turtleback Zoo, so absolutely, yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Finance, Mr. Griffin?
I'd like to present items D1 through D10.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Right, so go ahead, Mrs. Walsh.
Okay, so 10, the acceptance of a cyber insurance policy. Is that generally the case for all districts? Get that insurance, or is it we're selective and?
So as of last year, cyber insurance has been an add-on policy that the district has had to get. And if you can see, the term of this policy is actually an 18-month term. So this is going to put us back on the same schedule as the rest of the NESBEG districts. We're in a fragmented section with about 4 or 5 districts right now. So this will put us back on the same schedule as the rest of the NESBEG districts.
To the,
Hopefully, the market's been very tough for the cyber, so this is actually a 35% increase to what we're currently paying for our cyber insurance. So right now, cyber is increasing rapidly. Yeah.
Any other questions? Call the question?
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Needham?
Yes.
Mrs. Downey? Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian? Mrs. Walker? Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Delegate report, Mr. Walsh?
I have no report to make.
Personnel, Mrs. Walker?
I'd like to present F1.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? Call the question?
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Needham?
Yes.
Mrs. Downey? Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Policy, Mrs. Norian?
No report.
Public relations, Mrs. Acosta? Task force, we're just going to keep on for now and we need it. Open to the public. You could come up with one complaint, Mr. Butcher. Okay.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Old or new business? Mrs. Walker?
New business, Rotary is sponsoring a, Meet the Wizards on, February 17th, I think it is.
Yes. February 7th.
And, we're looking forward to rotating and our administrators. So, we're very excited, and we understand it was sold out in one day.
Yeah.
All the tickets.
Yeah.
Okay. so
In
that-
less
Maybe
than
that's why they
9
bought the
hours.
tickets.
Less
So
than
it-
9 hours, it was sold out.
It's a great fun night
Yeah.
for all the kids, so.
Will you be playing, Mr. Butcher? We may have to come for that.
Excellent.
Mr. Memora is currently on the list also.
News to me.
You said,
It's in the red section of the agenda. It's
Okay,
changed
that's
the night before.
the red. Mhm.
Superintendent.
Sure.
Any other old or new business?
I have a couple of questions, actually. So one is going through our school leader copy. I don't know if this came maybe last week.
Yeah.
I was going through this article about the threat assessment team and just wanted to understand if there are any actions that are going to be required on our end, on
I
the
actually,
administration.
yeah,
end.
I actually, administratively, we started training people. I've been trained. The entire, 3/4 of the administrative team have been trained. We have trained some staff. I think even on this agenda, you approved the training of 2 additional staff members. So we're putting our team together. I do believe that there will be a policy attached to this as well, if not a policy, a protocol, because it's really the mental health part of threat assessment. So it puts a team together that if we're concerned about an individual student, that team can get together and talk about what have they seen, have they seen changes over a period of time, and what are some next steps.
Understood. And I have one more item, which is related to cybersecurity, since that came up in today's agenda. Just wanted to understand, do we actually have a cybersecurity policy? And, does that kind of outline, if there's, if there's any sort of violation or an attack as it relates to, through cyber, what is the action that needs to be taken?
I can take. Yeah, so through the policy that we have, there's a list of steps that we have to take. I'm listed as the lead, so if there's ever a cyber incident, I would be the first one notified, and then I go through and there's steps I would contact the company that covers us, and then we would open up a claim.
Okay.
We also, I've always said one of the benefits of us using Bergen Tech to outsource is they are very experienced in this area. So while he's dealing with the claim, Bergen Tech will guide us through what are the actions we need to do right now with our devices, with our hardware, with our software.
Okay, thank you.
Any other old or new business? We do need to go into a quick closed session for a student issue, so does someone want to make a motion?
So moved.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Be taking any action? Good point.